This is my review of Upgrade, the new film from Lee Winnell. You know, that guy who got famous for co-creating the Saw franchise. I gotta say, I'm actually pretty impressed with this guy's career. He's been behind 2 popular horror franchises, and a few years ago he decided to start directing. I mean, sure, he's not as big of a name as James Wan, but the guy's a real talent and seems to understand genre on a very intimate level. Despite good reviews, Upgrade ended up being a disappointment at the box office. The budget was only $5 million, so I'm sure Blumhouse didn't take too much of a hit. Still, it's upsetting that something like Happy Death Day can make so much money, but something more original gets ignored by the mainstream. Upgrade is a sci-fi action film that's clearly influenced by films of the 80s, something like RoboCop comes to mind, or even films from Frank Henenlotter. It's about a guy who has a bunch of bad shit happen to him, and I mean really bad shit, and it leaves him disabled. He doesn't like the technology of this future that he lives in. He owns an old muscle car, and we never see him use a cell phone, and he kind of talks crap about people being on VR. This sort of reflects the movie itself, using modern special effects and cameras to do impressive things on a low budget, but also being an homage to B-movies that stay grounded despite a very high concept. I like this sort of world building, where we see enough of the universe to understand it, but the filmmaking stays pragmatic. We only get some, large city shots to show us it's the future, and occasionally we'll see some piece of technology, but for the most part it's just people inside their house or walking down alleyways. This movie hits the ground running, wasting no time in its setup. Logan Marshall Green, that guy who looks like Tom Hardy, oh yeah, and he was the guy that was shot on the OC. Stars as Gray, our lead character. This is a breakout performance for him as he shows his skills in both action and comedy, which I didn't know he had. He gets a computer chip installed in his neck called STEM. This gives him superhuman abilities. I guess you could say he's sort of like the $6 million man, although I'm sure this cost a lot more money to make. It's just really easy to feel bad for this guy, especially after what happens to his wife and just seeing him be pathetic and trying to overdose on drugs. The movie does a good job of creating a lot of empathy for this character. And elements of this movie reminded me of the show Black Mirror. And I mean the good episodes of Black Mirror, not the bullshit episodes in the later seasons. Like all good movies, this one has an internal logic that makes sense when you're watching it. Now, a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense when you actually think about it, and some of it's even really cheesy. But damn if Winnell doesn't somehow make it all work. There's a confidence to his direction that holds everything together. He's cut all of the fat out of the screenplay and gotten to the simple heart of his premise. STEM is actually one of the best parts of the movie, and him communicating with Gray is one of the script's more clever ideas. It's actually funny. STEM's playing kind of the straight man to the goofiness of Gray's character, and it sort of reminds you of like an Audrey 2 situation or something like that, and it's very, very entertaining. I've also got to praise the tone of this movie, which is a mix of all sorts of things that really works, and the pacing. This movie just moves at a fast clip and it doesn't waste any time. Each scene flows in a very organic way from one story beat to the next. Now, there's not a lot of experimentation here with how it's kind of put together, but I think it works for this movie. And overall, it just feels right. There was clearly a lot of care put into the finer details, and Upgrade's better for it. Gray's just an average Joe, and this is a nice way of giving the movie some much-needed humanity. But there's a moment, about 35 minutes in, that this movie goes from good to fucking badass. STEM starts to take more control of Gray's body, and this results in some truly impressive fight scenes. I mean, really awesome fight scenes. The camera work is off the charts, and the overall production value for this movie is just really good, even more so when you consider how low the budget was. The dialogue is self-aware and to the point, bringing a good amount of levity to this dark story. It's not going to be for everybody. Some people are going to probably think it's a little cheesy, but I found myself laughing at a lot of the dialogue, and I actually think this is Winnell's best screenplay. Gray's sense of humor is a nice counterbalance to everything that's going on. Like, there's some really fucked up situations in this movie, and he just has kind of like a one-liner, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, like I said, he's just a guy. He's not like some super badass. He's not an action hero. He's he's just a dude in a fucked up situation that's in something that he didn't even really ask for, and he just keeps getting deeper and deeper into it. And it's a really good idea for a movie to have the guy have this bad thing happen to him, to have him not like technology, to have him be disabled, to have him not have control of his body. There's just a lot of little elements like that that are really, really well strung together. I also appreciated all the body horror and gore, something we don't see enough of in modern movies. Did I mention that a dude has a gun in his arm? Yeah, this movie is pure fucking metal. Overall, I don't have many complaints outside of maybe the side characters and the villains needing to be a little bit more fleshed out. It was a little flat in that regard. I feel like you get to know Gray pretty well, but everyone else is just sort of like two-dimensional. Also, perhaps the movie could have went a little bit further with some of the things it promises. I think there was concepts here that if it in the movie had actually gone darker, this could have been a really interesting, smart movie. See, I took the movie as being about our growing reliance on technology and how it's slowly taking control of our lives and even influencing our decision-making. What's the price for living in a world with constant upgrades? This movie isn't exactly deep, but it's not stupid either. I think you have to take a film for what it is, what it's trying to accomplish. And Upgrade succeeds in that regard. You know, there's a clear end goal here, and he pulls it off. I will say, the ending is what really puts this movie over the top. See, the twist of the original Saw I always found to be really overrated and kind of stupid. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed all the stuff in the bathroom and thought there was a lot of good parts to Saw, but I always thought, I don't know, it was a little overpraised for that final 5 minutes. This twist, though? Holy shit. It somehow accomplishes two things at once, and I loved it. Overall, I just found this movie entertaining as hell. I think it's a real accomplishment. I don't know when Winnell became such a good director, because I saw the Insidious film he directed, and it wasn't that well shot. I mean, it wasn't poorly written or anything. It wasn't very technically well made, but he's really improved, or he got a really good cinematographer, I don't know. But it's a good looking film. It's a well put together film. I mean, I wish he would have done some more creative stuff with certain story elements or how he kind of edited the film. It's very straightforward, but it just moves so quickly. There's so much kinetic energy to it, and there's so many twists happening that it doesn't really hold the movie back that much. Even the other characters not being that fleshed out, you don't really care ultimately, because you're so invested in what's happening with Gray's character and his relationship with Stem. And every time something new happens, it's like you're figuring it out for the first time with the character. Like at first you're like, man, it'd be pretty cool to have this stem thing in your neck and be like a badass and have a computer telling you everything to do. But then once you start to see what actually happens with this thing, you're like, oh shit, no, I wouldn't want this. This is horrifying. And it's that balance that this movie finds, that you're kind of ahead of the character, but really what's going on in, behind the scenes you're actually not fully aware of, and that makes the movie better. Because it could have just ended up being a generic action film within the third act that he goes to fight the final bad guy and, wins the day and gets revenge for his wife. But the movie does something so much more interesting than that, and I respect Winnell greatly for coming up with something like that and actually making a film that's kind of scary in that regard, thinking about how close this seems to be to our future. Like that this seems very possible, that we could very soon be in a place where people are getting, things added to their bodies. I mean, we already see people do this with their legs and their hands now, but actually having a gun in your arm or having a computer chip telling you what to do and all that stuff, it doesn't seem that far-fetched. And the horror elements of this movie that go into that and make it go like, oh man, the future might be really painful and kind of sneak up on us, which is what Black Mirror does. That's where the comparison, comes from. It's kind of reminded me of a Charlie Brooker screenplay, the better screenplays he writes. So overall, just a really good movie. Upgrade's one of my favorite films of 2018, and I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. That might seem a little high to some of you. You're probably like, that's more like a 7, and I can get you feeling that way. I mean, like I said, it's not some deep, cerebral science fiction masterpiece, but entertainment value goes a long way for me, and I just think this is such an enjoyable movie and a future cult classic that it's hard for me not to recommend it. Even the colors used in the movie and one of the final shots, it's just so awesome, and it's stayed with me since I've seen it. So, yeah, if you didn't catch this in theaters, go buy the Blu-ray and give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and please rewind your VHS tapes before you bring them back to the store.
I don't know what this is, but it's kind of hot. Damn, girl. You grew up.